Few lives in American entertainment were as dazzling, complex, and defiant as that of Sammy Davis Jr. Born on December 8, 1925, in Harlem, New York, he came into the world as the son of vaudeville performers who lived their art on the road. By the time most children learned to read, Sammy was already on stage, tapping in the spotlight. He would grow into one of the greatest all-around entertainers the 20th century ever produced. A singer, dancer, actor, and comedian whose talent knew no boundaries and whose charisma demanded respect in a segregated America. But behind the glamour, the tuxedos, and the infectious smile was a man constantly wrestling with identity, faith, and belonging. He broke color barriers in Las Vegas, sang beside Sinatra and Dean Martin as part of the Rat Pack, and yet was often forced to enter through the back door of the same venues where he performed. His life was a paradox, celebrated by the public, yet scarred by the prejudice of his time. Beyond the stage lights, however, existed another Sammy, the husband, the father, the man who longed for something quieter and more permanent than applause. His journey as a parent was marked by love, chaos, and contradiction, a reflection of the whirlwind that defined his own life. Though he fathered one biological child and adopted 3, each of them inherited a piece of the man who never stopped performing, even when the audience disappeared. To understand Sammy Davis Jr., one must look beyond the legend to the people who called him Dad. Their stories reveal the tenderness hidden beneath the showmanship, the contradictions he never escaped, and the enduring rhythm of a family born in fame's relentless glow. Number 4. Tracey Davis. Tracey Hilary Davis was born on July 5, 1961, in Los Angeles, the only biological child of Sammy Davis Jr. and Swedish-born actress May Britt. Her birth came at a turbulent time. America was still battling the flames of segregation, and her parents' interracial marriage in 1960 was considered both bold and controversial. For Sammy, their union wasn't just personal, it was political. He had married the woman he'd loved, but in doing so, became a target. Their family received death threats, and certain studios even blacklisted him. For young Tracey, the world she entered was already divided before she took her first breath. Growing up as Sammy Davis Jr.'s daughter meant living at the intersection of glamour and isolation. Her father's life was a carousel of lights, Rat Pack parties, Vegas residences, global tours. But it was also a life that rarely paused. Tracey once recalled that she didn't always have her father's time, but she always had his attention. When he was home, he was all in. Warm, funny, eager to teach her how to dance, and determined to show her that love could overcome resentment. Yet she often felt she was sharing him with the entire world. After Sammy and May Britt divorced in 1968, Tracey's childhood became a balancing act between 2 parents who loved her but lived very different lives. She grew up between Los Angeles and her mother's European roots, absorbing both Hollywood's dazzle and Sweden's quiet civility. As an adult, she became an author and storyteller, determined to define her father not by legend, but by truth. In 1996, she published Sammy Davis Jr. My Father, a memoir that peeled away the performance to reveal the man. A complex blend of ambition, regret, humor, and heart. Tracey described her father as both larger than life and deeply human. A man who could command a stage yet tremble before the thought of losing those he loved. She revealed how his addiction to perfection, fame, and acceptance often made him his own toughest critic. But more than anything, she saw him as a man who wanted to give more than he had ever received. Tracey Davis passed away in November 2020 at the age of 59, leaving behind 2 sons, Sam and Mark. Her death closed a chapter of first-hand memory, but not of meaning. Through her words and her love, she preserved her father's legacy not as a caricature of Hollywood, but as a man who lived loudly, loved imperfectly, and gave everything to those who carried his name. Number 3. Mark Davis. Mark Davis was adopted by Sammy Davis Jr. and his third wife, Untold Davis, during the 1960s. Unlike Tracey, who grew up in the glare of her parents' fame, Mark's entry into the Davis family came at a time when Sammy's career had matured, but his personal life was increasingly complicated. The man who had conquered Vegas and Broadway was now fighting battles of a different kind. Financial strain, substance dependency, and the unrelenting expectations of being the world's first black superstar to sit comfortably among white legends. Amid all that noise, Mark grew up learning what fame gives and what it takes away. Sammy wanted to be a father who offered opportunity, not pressure. He surrounded Mark with the rhythm of music and dance, hoping that art would serve as a language of connection. But being Sammy Davis Jr.'s son came with expectations that few could bear. Mark admired his father, but also saw the toll that constant performance took on him, the exhaustion behind the smile, the loneliness that followed every standing ovation. Those lessons shaped him deeply. As Mark entered adulthood, he drifted away from the spotlight, deliberately rejecting the path of celebrity. He saw what fame had done to his father and sought a life of normalcy instead. For years, little was known about him publicly. He preferred privacy to publicity, work to worship. Yet after Sammy's death in 1990, when the estate became the center of legal and financial disputes, Mark emerged briefly to ensure that his father's legacy and his mother's dignity were not forgotten. He spoke not as a star's son, but as a man determined to protect the truth from exploitation. Mark's bond with his father was quiet but enduring. Sammy's lessons to him weren't about applause, they were about resilience. "Always finish the number," Sammy once told him, meaning that no matter how rough the performance or the audience, you never stop until the song is done. It was advice Mark carried into his own life. Away from the cameras, he found peace not in recognition, but in reflection, continuing his father's legacy in silence rather than spotlight. If Tracey was the storyteller who revealed Sammy's soul to the world, Mark became the keeper of his steadiness, the heir to his endurance. Through him, the showman's restless heart finally found a moment of calm. Number 2. Jeff Davis. Jeff Davis entered Sammy Davis Jr.'s life during the mid-1960s, one of 3 children he and Untold Davis would adopt together. By then, Sammy had conquered nearly every corner of entertainment: Las Vegas residencies, Broadway triumphs, and television variety specials. But the man behind the applause was searching for something the stage could not provide: permanence. Adopting children, he often said, allowed him to build a life that couldn't walk away when the curtain dropped. Jeff was raised amid a swirl of energy that few homes could contain. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Quincy Jones were regular visitors. Music drifted from every room, and laughter could turn to argument in the span of a song. Sammy's household was glamorous, but it was also fragmented, a world where rehearsal schedules replaced family dinners. Yet Jeff adored his father's magnetism and his sense of humor. Sammy treated his children with the same mix of discipline and showmanship that defined his art. Bedtime often ended with a tap routine or a song instead of a lullaby. As Jeff grew older, he began to see more of the cracks behind the perfection. His father's financial struggles were mounting, and fame, once his greatest ally, had become a relentless creditor. Through those years, Jeff became fiercely protective of both his parents, especially Untold, whose loyalty to Sammy endured through scandal and bankruptcy. Friends later described Jeff as the quiet guardian of the family, the one who avoided publicity but stayed close when everything else fell apart. Unlike Tracey, who carried her father's story into books, or Mark, who guarded the family's privacy, Jeff lived in the space between, never denying the legacy, but refusing to be defined by it. He worked in various creative and business ventures throughout his adulthood, often under the radar. When Sammy died in 1990, Jeff was among those who helped organize the memorial at Forest Lawn, ensuring that the tribute reflected the man's humanity, not just his fame. For Jeff, being Sammy Davis Jr.'s son was less about inheritance and more about understanding a lesson his father repeated endlessly. That identity is something you perform until it becomes real. In Jeff's quiet stewardship, that identity, Black, Jewish, American, and unapologetically original, continues to live on. Number 1. Manny Davis. Manny Davis was the youngest of Sammy and Alta Davis's adopted children, and perhaps the one who would come to play the most visible role in preserving his father's legacy. Adopted during the later years of Sammy's career, Manny entered a household that was both glamorous and chaotic, filled with rehearsals, laughter, debts, and constant motion. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Sammy was still performing relentlessly, chasing not fame but stability. His family became his grounding force, and Manny, still a child, witnessed firsthand the cost of maintaining greatness. As the youngest, Manny grew up when his father was already a living legend. The world saw Sammy Davis Jr. as the Rat Pack's unstoppable dynamo. But Manny saw the man at rest, the one who hummed gospel melodies under his breath, who called himself the luckiest cat alive, yet often worried about how history would remember him. When Sammy fell ill with throat cancer in 1989, Manny was there, watching the performer who once commanded every room grow quieter, more reflective. It was then that he made an unspoken promise: to protect his father's story. After Sammy's death in 1990, Manny became the de facto custodian of the Davis legacy. He helped his mother, Alta, navigate years of financial and legal struggles that followed the entertainer's passing, ensuring that his father's catalog, image, and contributions to American culture were preserved rather than exploited. When Alta passed away in 2009, Manny assumed full responsibility for managing the Sammy Davis Jr. estate, a responsibility that became both burden and honor. Manny worked closely with producers, authors, and film historians to restore his father's archives and promote documentaries that revealed Sammy not only as a performer, but as a cultural revolutionary, a Black, Jewish, one-eyed entertainer who broke barriers through sheer talent and will. He became the family's bridge to a new generation, using media to remind audiences why Sammy mattered, not just because he sang and danced better than anyone else, but because he demanded to belong in a world that told him he couldn't. For Manny Davis, legacy is not nostalgia. It is work. Through him, Sammy's story remains alive, a rhythm that refuses to fade. And in every restored performance, every documentary, and every song revived on a modern stage, the echo of that promise remains clear. The show isn't over. Sammy Davis Jr.'s life was a paradox made flesh, a man of unstoppable talent, yet forever chasing acceptance, a showman born in the footlights, yet yearning for the warmth of home. He sang, he danced, he acted, but more than that, he endured. Through his children, that endurance has found new shape, refracted into lives that carry the essence of his brilliance without the burden of imitation. Tracey Davis gave her father his humanity back, stripping away myth to reveal a man who was vulnerable, flawed, and ferociously loving. Mark Davis became the quiet guardian, preserving dignity where spectacle once ruled. Jeff Davis embodied loyalty, the son who stood firm when the lights dimmed and the debts mounted. And Manny Davis emerged as the archivist of memory, ensuring that Sammy's name would remain not as a relic, but as a living part of American culture. Each of them reflects a different verse of the same song. Tracey, the melody of truth; Mark, the rhythm of resilience; Jeff, the harmony of loyalty; Manny, the refrain of legacy. Together, they form the unspoken chorus of a life that refused to fade to silence. Sammy Davis Jr. died in 1990, but his influence never stopped moving. Every modern performer who crosses boundaries, every artist who demands to be seen for their full humanity, walks a path he carved decades earlier. His story is not one of tragedy, but of transformation. A man who turned pain into rhythm, isolation into laughter, and prejudice into performance. Through his children, the music plays on. In every new retelling, in every restored note of his voice, the lesson remains that greatness is not perfection, it is persistence. And for Sammy Davis Jr., the curtain never truly fell. It simply rose again in another form, through the family he built and the legacy he refused to let die.